Welcome friends. As you know, we've been running a series on feminism, and the title of the series is Feminist Texts, and our purpose is to acquaint you with specific ideas that different feminist thinkers of the previous centuries, the 20th century in particular, and now the 21st century, whatever we can cover, those texts are made available to you in the form of ideas. And today's lecture by Professor Richa Bajaj, who teaches English in Hindu College, Delhi University, would be focusing upon the ideas of Cixous, and the text that she is going to cover today is the Law of Medusa. Without any further ado, may I request Dr. Bajaj to begin her lecture, and my curiosity is to first understand the significance of this title, which is slightly odd in the context of theory. So what do you say?
Yes, interesting that it is odd in the context of theory. But that's, I think, the point that Helene Cixous here is trying to make, that theory has its roots in history and in legends and all that we have heard so far, understood and believed to be true. So she takes this title from, of course, the kind of monstrous figure of Medusa in Greek mythology. So returning to Greek mythology, she actually finds that Medusa is always seen as, of course, she's a female monster, she's a winged female monster, a gorgon who has snakes in place of hair on her head. So that, and has eyes popped out, and obviously another feature of Medusa is that whoever she sees, whoever looks into her eyes and she meets the gaze, the person turns into stone. So interestingly, she was also a mortal among other monsters. But and this priestess then, Medusa, was cursed because she broke her vow of celibacy, and therefore she was turned into this monster. Now, how Helene Cixous is using this kind of a legend or this kind of a monster woman is to suggest that women always occupy the dark, dangerous, monstrous sort of a realm in society, and the normative, white, beautiful is always the male. So bringing back her whole idea that the entire history of writing, literature, whatever is written, the entire history of writing is based on this kind of self-admiring, self-obsessed masculinity. And she speaks of this masculinity as informing every sphere of life. And she says that, there is a kind of this culture, this culture that we live in is is obviously dominated by this kind of masculine economy, where everything gets defined by the normative man, and the woman occupies the margin or the periphery or the dark, incomprehensible areas of life. So it's and when she talks about Medusa, she's basically this essay, The Laugh of the Medusa, is actually addressed to women and written for women, because she's in a way calling women out of their spheres, out of their very sort of shy existence that they have so far had. So she's trying to bring women forth and bring them out of this kind of an enclosure, and asking them to write their experiences, to not be ashamed. There's another thing about shame and guilt that she brings in the essay, where she says that guilt is something that has informed us. I mean, we are guilty of being who we are, whether we choose to be the desiring woman or the frigid woman. In either case, we are always fighting a sense of guilt, being a mother or not being a mother. So again, she says it is guilt that keeps returning to us and keeps us shy, keeps us silent, keeps us wary of speaking, and therefore also keeps us in the dark domain.
Which means it's a very rich metaphor
Right.
in terms of its width, in terms of its range, and that it's a monster. But then you are talking about that particular monster in the context of women. Because the patriarchy is generally critical of the male role in life. So I think it's a very meaningful metaphor, and very interesting also.
Yeah, interesting. Also, because in the essay she says, when she mentions Medusa, for instance, so it's not like the whole essay is on Medusa. She just picks up a metaphor. In all probability, she would have thought of the title later, having written the whole piece. She would have thought of it, and probably this is how it emerged. But the metaphors seem to carry the sense of.
What does laugh signify?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying here, that when she comes to talking about Medusa, she says in the text that you only have to look at the Medusa straight on to see her, and she's not deadly, she's beautiful, and she's laughing. So in a way, the woman that you see, or the world wants you to see, or the world sees, is a monster in that sense, beautiful only to the extent that beauty is defined by men, but otherwise she's a monster. And she says, it's when you stop fearing the woman that you are, when you look into your own eyes, when you look into the eyes of this Medusa, this other you, which has so far been repressed and has been the dark monstrous side, or looks monstrous to the world, it is actually a beautiful laughing woman. And to look into the eyes of, so the metaphor actually, if you take it from the point of view of a woman, she says, no, this looking into her eyes will not turn you into stone. It will give you a sense of self-realization. And you only have to look into her eyes. When she says that, when you look into her eyes, you'll not be turned into a stone. Rather, you will find there a beautiful laughing woman. It's only when we refuse to see Medusa in the eye, we refuse to see her for who she is, and therefore we build a sort of a perception around her which society would see as monstrous. So an aggressive woman would be seen as monstrous. A woman desirous, ambitious, or with female sexual desires would be seen also as monstrous. So she says that for patriarchy, for this world which is largely when she talks about language in this sense, a world which is centered on masculinity, such a world sees this woman as monstrous, but not you. This is so addressing women, that this is not you, this is the other side of you, and it is, if you look into her, you will find that it is beautiful. This image is beautiful and is laughing. So again, the laugh is something that she is obviously setting score by, and she says that this is what women need to do, that is to laugh through it, to laugh at the kind of constraints that have been built around the images that so far men have built around women, and to wade past through them, or to destroy them and then fly past them. So her images in that sense, her images in the essay, etc., tell you that it's a very poetically written sort of an essay.
I see.
She is very few people know, but she's also penned poems. She's known as a theorist, Helene Cixous, but she's written poems and a lot of creative work as well. So when you read this essay, the kind of leaps she takes, almost like she's being idealistic at one point, but at another, she sort of merges the realms of imagination, expression, sexuality, the woman experience, and then writes this essay. So this essay in a way is poetically articulating the vision that she has of the new age woman, I'd say. That's how I'd like to begin the discussion.
Let's hear the views of the essay. It is so interesting.
Right. So, when we look at the essay per se, and we've discussed the title so far, there are a couple of things that this essay tries to pitch forth. The first thing that, she actually begins her essay with is this idea of writing. And when she talks about this idea of writing, here she combines the act of writing as expressing as a kind of a revolutionary act in itself, right? And she says here that commenting on the very historical time also, this is something that we need to also keep in mind, that this essay came out in 1975. So this has seen, and in France, so we've already seen the May 1968 protests of students, of women, and women's liberation movement at the time. So this comes at, close on the heels of this kind of a rupture in society where intellectuals felt that society could be changed, and this in a way infuses new life into women's movement, right? So often you find in the essay Cixous returning to the point that now the time has come. for women to take charge, or now it is mark our times and the times are different, we are going to break away. So the idea of breaking away from these constraints and or these norms that have imprisoned women so far is a kind of a constant motive during the period, which is then applied by Cixous. Now Cixous also was one amongst the first to actually found this kind of a women's studies wing in the University of Paris. So in a way, she is doing some groundbreaking work in her own field, creating a kind of a discipline of feminist studies or women's studies in her own sphere. And there, when she's talking about this historical woman, she says in the essay that, and I quote, please look at the screen, you'd be able to see the text there. And she says, since these reflections are taking shape in an area just on the point of being discovered, they necessarily bear the mark of our time, a time during which the new breaks away from the old, and more precisely, the feminine new from the old. End quote. Now, what does she mean by the feminine new? So there is a kind of an awareness that they are at this crucial juncture of theory as such. We began the discussion with how in theory legend has made its way, how mythology has entered theory, how theory is also reinventing itself. So in the hands of Helene Cixous, you find that she goes into theory, but then returns to the present woman and her experiences. It's a very experience-centered sort of a essay, and not trying to build a kind of a hypothesis or of any kind. Obviously, the main point of this essay is to talk about écriture féminine, which is what is writing the woman, right? When she says the new feminine breaking away from the old woman, and she says, it's also about liberating the new woman from the clutches of the old woman which has so far been is perceived as men would perceive her. The new woman will begin the task of writing herself. And interestingly, when she talks about writing, she also says that there would be, we find that we'd have to destroy a lot and to be able to break many things, but also to foresee the unforeseeable, in the sense that you destroy and you make at the same time, right? So there is a kind of there is a kind of endeavor which is working at two levels. One is that you have to break old norms, you have to break old structures, which she also actually in language, when this essay is in a way takes this kind of a way, if I were to use these terms, then it takes help of language, it uses sexuality, it uses psychoanalysis, and then makes a kind of feminist theory out of it. For instance, she uses the idea of Jacques Derrida of the logocentric theory, and connects this logocentric theory, as Lou Sirigire also does, but connects this logocentric theory with a kind of a phallic world that one inhabits, and creates this kind of a new terminology of phallo-logocentric world, right? So in fact, she says in the essay that for the phallo-logocentric, sublation is with us, and it's militant, regenerating the old patterns anchored in the dogma of castration. Now, if you look at this quote, you will be able to see how many views she's been able to bring together. One is logos on the center of language, of meaning, of history of meaning, again taking from post-structuralists, particularly the theory of deconstruction of Derrida, and Derrida and Cixous were good friends. So she took this kind of a theory, added to it the idea of castration, which for the psychoanalysts constantly dwell on. For instance, Lacan does that, and before that Freud. So talking and then bringing these things into feminism, and to talk about the feminist experience as one which has to fight this phallo-logocentric world, which is militant in its spirit, which regenerates old patterns of living, and which is totally anchored in the dogma of castration, which is basically castration here refers to the fear of men of castration, and the fearing the woman in a way is also a kind of a fear of castration, that they don't want to become the woman, that they never never want to become the woman, and that they fear being that. And so in that sense, it gets connected with the idea that women are defined by a sense of lack. And this is something that she keeps building on also in the essay, that my identity as a woman is not defined on the basis of the lack that I am, it is assumed I have. There is no sense of lack, and it's not a hole that needs to be filled. So in a way, castration is not something that you can define women with. So or men, and she says that men also then suffer this kind of a fear, and it's a kind of a pity that they have to constantly live with this fear. So in a way, she's also breaking old psychoanalytic theoretical models, also breaking old models of language, of logos, of meaning, of centering meaning, which is masculine and self-admiringly so, and self-obsessively. So in a way, she's using these theories in order to come to a kind of a perspective of the new feminine experience in the 1970s, and that's something also, these women, whether it was Helene Cixous or Irigere, etc., they're constantly drawing on the experience of other writers and using, the text for post-structuralists becomes very important. But here she talks not just about the text, rather what she calls sects. So it's not T-E-X-T but S-E-X-T. So in changing the whole logic of seeing a feminine text, which she also uses the term écriture féminine, right? So writing the woman is for her something which is very close to also, which is an act, she says, that will bring us close to our own selves. She points out how, this is also how she begins her essay. She actually says that women have been driven away from their bodies very violently. Their bodies are not their own. Their sexuality is not their own. Who they are, what they desire is not something that they even know. So she says that we have been driven away from our bodies violently as we have been driven away from writing. So writing has been a purely masculine domain, and she says when a woman would write her experience, when she would write her or express herself by writing, what she means is expressing. So she says when a woman begins to express herself, it is at this point that she will also return to her body, she will also return to her desire, she would also return to who she is. So writing, she finds, is a very important political act, because it's writing in a way is also registering. You see, writing is registering what you think, and so far she says women have kept what they feel, what they desire unto themselves because of a sense of guilt or because they are too shy and all of that. So she says there is this kind of the woman must put herself into the text, because by putting herself into the text, it is only then that she'll be able to discover her own self and also be able to register what she has so far not registered or has not been able to express so far. So when she's speaking of her own experience also, she says at one point, and it's about women's desires, where she's talking about the erotic and the sensuous, and she says, and I'm quoting from the text, she says, "I too overflow. My desires have invented new desires. My body knows unheard of songs. Time and again, I too have felt so full of luminous torrents that I could burst with forms much more beautiful than those which are put in frames and sold for a stinking fortune. I too said nothing, showed nothing. I didn't open my mouth. I didn't repaint my half of the world. I was ashamed, I was afraid, and I swallowed my shame and my fear." So, end quote. Now, what is she really trying to say? That by not writing, by not speaking, by not expressing, by not opening my mouth, she says, I could never repaint that other half of my world that remained submerged in my consciousness. And it is for this reason that she actually equates women's experience to the unconscious. the repressed in society. In the sense, she says that women's experience is very close to the repressed, because they have never really spoken what they felt, they have never really expressed, and they have never really taken on language and unleashed, so to speak, their own feminine force through it. So in fact, this is something I'd like to dwell on a bit, about the idea of the text and the idea of woman writing. Why she constantly returns to this point that you must write, write whatever you feel, write and bring it onto the text, create a female text. At one level, she feels that this should be done probably because men have so far dominated the sphere of writing, and it is time that women take charge. But at another, she's also trying to tell women that this is the only way you will become aware of yourself, through writing. What do you think?
No, it's a very interesting idea, and a very positive idea also, that half of the population till the 19th century did not have an occasion to express themselves, and that they had a body and they had to express through that body their personality. That is totally missing in writing. The particularly fascinating idea is writing as an act of politics, right, that you have rightly stressed, and the other is the writing the woman. And this is really gives us different ideas, that one has to define women, one has to recognize women, one has to see what they are and what their role is, and that writing that way is a very important part of their personality.
Right. And good you spoke about writing through the body, because that's what she's connecting. She's connecting the body with writing. Mm-hmm. And there's one more interesting thing she says, that she says when women write or when women speak, expression. She says when women speak, there is not just the voice that speaks, it's their body that speaks. Mm-hmm. She says she trembles with every part of her body when she speaks. And she says, hear a woman in public and you will realize that each part of her body speaks. It's her flesh which speaks the truth and comes out and conveys. And it's not just the voice. She's not repeating something, unlike the male. So in a way projecting something interesting.
What does the woman do to the language that she speaks? Adding to the already rich language, adding an alternative language, a language that is totally distinct. How do you connect that with this?
Yeah, so for her, language is something that is a part of a woman's bodily experience also. Mm-hmm. So, and she says that when one speaks or writes, especially when she says when one woman speaks, then she says that you will see her flesh speaking. So in a way, of course, it's a metaphor, and she's very fond of using several metaphors. For instance, another metaphor around writing that she uses is based on this idea of the experience of motherhood. And she says that how motherhood itself is something that is a metaphor. Being a mother itself is a metaphor, and that a woman writes, she says, in white ink. When she says, again, experience, the bodily experience of motherhood, of feeding, of white milk, yeah, she expresses that. She says, so she writes in white ink, suggesting that where the milk and the ink join, the mother's milk joins with the ink of the writing woman. So the writing woman, in that sense, is a woman in her own right. She's not in a sense, in a way, trying to create a neutral body or a kind of a neutral subject. It's a very feminine subject in her case, and it is this feminine subject that she tries to then unite with the writing experience. So there is sexuality, there is writing, there is imagination, and they all come together and create a sort of a web, and from which emerges this kind of a feminine writing, or écriture féminine, that she refers to in this text.
Is there a scope in feminism of the kind that Cixous is explaining and presenting to add to the knowledge of men and humanize them in that sense? Is that there? That when women write, they not only express themselves, but they also leave an impact on men and they humanize them. Otherwise, they would be always one-sided.
Right. In a sense that there are two, at least, points that she raises on this account. One is that men are to be pitied for their the kind of life that they have to live under this kind of a fear of castration, for instance, or in negating the woman. So she says in a way that it is to be pitied, right? And therefore they need to be brought out of the clutches of this old theoretical framework, and maybe hence humanized. The other thing is that she's also aware that it's not just a man-woman sort of a fight, but rather that when women return and by claiming the body and by writing, women are set to make a kind of a mark or a kind of a change in society, and they're set to change the very fabric of society, not just this man-woman relationship. So I think there, when she speaks of bringing about a change which is going to be more momentous and larger than just the man-woman binary, there I think she's talking about humanity and society.
So in a way, you're explaining the political role of women, writing and expressing their views and telling men that there is another kind of reality also that will give fullness or a completeness to the social personality.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yes, I think so. That's how we would like to.
I think that's a very good conclusion regarding the role of women's writing in the modern world. And Dr. Richa Bajaj has presented this point very cogently, and we look forward to more discussion with her about Cixous thing in the following discussion. Thank you.